has the second lowest U.S. reciprocal tariffs next to Singapore. Alex Muscatelli, the director of the economics team at Fitch Ratings, warns that this could still deliver a shock to exporters. Here's my exclusive interview with him from London.
In our March Global Economic Outlook, we had assumed that the effective tariff rate of the U.S. on all its trading partners on average across the globe would be 18%. And in particular, we assumed that there would be a 35% average tariff rate on China, 15% on the European Union and most other countries, and similar, although slightly lower rates for Canada and Mexico. But with the announcements that we had, if these were to remain in place, we think the effective tariff rate is around 25%, which would be significantly higher than the one we assumed back in March, just a few weeks ago, and would be the highest effective tariff rate for the US for more than 115 years.
Wow, weren't even born then. Assuming that this all happens, Alex, who brings down the global economy first? Is it the US, or do you think its biggest trading partners? Because there are those who say that American consumers will suffer higher cost of goods, and others say that the US will fall into recession.
Well, first of all, the impact of tariffs will be felt by in America. The impact of higher tariffs will result in higher consumer prices and lower corporate profits in the US, because it will raise costs for US importing firms that then use their imports to then process and as intermediate goods. So the first impact will be on domestic US prices and domestic US profits. Then we have what this will do. This will squeeze real incomes in the US. The lower profits and the higher policy uncertainty will act as a drag on business investment. So we were expecting, we had already factored in a bit of a slowdown in US GDP. In March, we thought that the US economy was going to grow by 1.7% this year. So this is a downside risk to that.
So whose sovereign ratings are looking vulnerable here in Asia?
Well, I would say, first of all, I wouldn't want to comment too much on sovereign ratings per se, also because these things are decided on a rating review by rating review basis. And also it's actually I'm in the economics team, so I'm actually not so involved in that side of things. But it's clear that from the macroeconomic perspective, there is the announcements of April the 2nd do assume a bit more downside risk to our forecasts for specific Asian economies, just mechanically through the higher tariff rates that we saw announced for Vietnam, for Thailand, Taiwan, also Philippines, but also India, Korea. I think there are two things to bear in mind in this of sources of risk. One is the increase in the tariff itself. Two is the exposure of a specific country to the US, and this is where relatively larger countries, well, for example, China, for example, Japan, are probably less exposed than Korea, than Malaysia, than Vietnam, just because the share of US demand in their GDP is a bit less, just mechanically.
Well, the Philippines is second to the lowest next to Singapore in terms of the reciprocal tariffs. Does this provide any relative insulation, if you will, as Vietnam's and Cambodia's are at north of 40%?
Possibly, but it's still a big increase. I mean, if you look at where tariffs are now for the Philippines, if I'm not mistaken, we're looking at effective tariff rate of around 6% for the US on imports from the Philippines. So if this advertised new tariff value goes through, it will still be a bit of a shock to exporters in the Philippines.
True. So who in Asia then can or may benefit from the trade and investment diversion effects? Because that's the next step then, the money flowing where the tariffs are lowest.
Indeed. Well, the problem is it's not exactly clear who does this time around. So, and this is one difference from the trade war that we saw in Trump's first term. And so in 2018, 2019, those tariff changes, those tariff rises were very focused on China. And so what happened in subsequent years is that we saw a lot of production moved offshore and a lot of supply chains lengthening with investment in Southeast Asia, especially Vietnam. Vietnam has become one of the US's main trading partners in the space of a few years. It's not clear anyone's in a fantastic position to do this time around. So maybe it's not a question of seeing which Asian countries can benefit from diversion from trade from the US, but seeing which markets can everyone access maybe as a replacement to the US.
We'll follow through on that as the weeks go by.
That's Alex Muscatelli, the Director of Economics Team at Fitch Ratings in London.